Okay, you are screen sharing. Okay, cool, recording. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about descriptive studies. We had an overview of that on Wednesday, but we're going to get a little bit more detailed today. Should be a relatively shorter class because today and actually Friday should be a relatively shorter class because I want you to have time to answer any question or to ask any questions about the assignments or the exam. But so let's just do a brief overview of what today and tomorrow will look like. Like I said, we're going to be talking about descriptive studies. And then after class, I'll be able to answer any questions you may have about assignment number 3, which you should be able to view on eCampus. I provided everyone feedback Monday night, or assignment number 4, which is your introduction assignment, which is due this weekend. So plenty of time after class to stay on and answer any questions you may have. Then on Friday, we're going to have a short lecture on methods, or what makes up the methods section. I'm going to assign and walk you through assignment number 5. Hopefully you'll see that the methods section is a lot more structured than the introduction. You only really have to make a couple changes throughout the paragraphs. We kind of give you a really detailed outline of the paragraphs and just a couple changes you need to make. So it shouldn't take you too long. But anyways, you're going to talk about assignment number 5, and then Friday after class, which, like I said, should be relatively short, I'll be able to answer any questions you have about the exam. So let's talk about exam number 2. So exam number 2 is this coming Monday. It will be available from 1 to 3 p.m., but you only have an hour once you open it. But I don't think it's going to take you the full hour. It's set up just like exam number 1, 20-something multiple choice questions, and this time two open-ended and 1 extra credit. Actually, there's 2 extra credits. It's just like last time. You have to log in through eCampus through Lockdown Browser. This time, the Respondus monitor, like the video portion of it, should be working. So, show your student ID, and then you're going to have to show your clean and quiet work area, show your desk. Like I said, format is multiple choice for an answer questions. Once again, the password is research. Just for the people with their cameras on or like thumbs up, did you have to put in a password for the last exam? Okay, you did? Okay, cool. Just wanted to make sure. So yeah, once again, the password is going to be research. For preparation, just like last time, review the lecture notes, pre-recorded lecture clips, the quiz questions. Another question for you. Do you get access to the quiz questions at the the weekly quizzes? Do you get the answers to those after you submit? You don't? Okay. I can set that up and see if that you can get it. But you were experienced the quiz questions, so you kind of get an idea of the type of questions you'd ask on the exam. But I will see what I can do about getting you the answers to those exam questions.
I checked the quiz a couple of days before the exam, and you can see them after the due dates pass.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's how it works. I think you have to go back. I'm assuming you checked your grade. Is that how you saw?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so in eCampus, however you check your grades, I believe you can just click it and it will show you the answers to the questions. So for everyone else, go and try that today or tomorrow or sometime over the next couple. Yeah, Justin says he can see them. So that's how you go about doing it. You just go in and click your grade and you can see the answers. The study guide, so I uploaded a study guide to that folder with study guide. Check that out, has a couple practice questions. And then I also uploaded the review session that was held during the fall semester. So, if you are interested, take a look at that video. Yeah, are there any questions about exam number 2? Or just, I guess, the general structure of it. Come to class on Friday about any questions about specific material that we've gone over in the past 2 weeks. Oh, yeah. So it's not cumulative. I mean, it is cumulative, but it's not cumulative in the sense that the only information that will be on the exam is stuff that was presented since the last exam. So don't worry about having to know, or know the specifics of things that were from exam number 1. Only the stuff in between exam number 1 and exam number 2 will be on exam number 2. All right, So if there's no questions about that, let's move into talking about descriptive studies. So this slide should be review of things that we talked about. I believe it was last class where we talked about descriptive studies, correlational studies, experimental and quasi-experimental studies. So this should be a review, but the goal of descriptive studies is to systematically describe characteristics, behaviors, or experiences of a population. So we want to describe what occurs, but we don't attempt to explain why. We don't try to answer, well, why are these two variables related? We just want to look at some descriptive things about particular variables. So the study is typically focused on obtaining information, not testing a specific hypothesis. And most studies aren't just purely descriptive, but for the descriptive part of studies, there are typically not a hypothesis. It's just, hey, when we want to explore aggressive or playground behaviors of children. It's just we want to explore something. We want to learn more about it. So descriptive studies can vary both in the design and the method of collecting data. And that is what today's lecture is going to be all about. It's just going to be different designs and methods of collecting data for descriptive studies. So here's a question that is coming right out of the last class, at the end of last class. So compared to other research designs, descriptive studies have the blank internal validity and blank external validity. So what we're looking for is the most or least internal and external validity. So in the chat feature using the direct message, is it A, B, C, or D? And just as a reminder, what internal and external validity are. Internal validity means, or having high internal validity means you are tightly controlling the experiment or the study or the variables in the study, while external validity, having high external validity, is the idea that the results that you find are applicable to the real world. All right, I'm seeing responses come in. Okay, cool. So I am seeing a split, a pretty even split between B and C, which is good because in a way that's good because at least everyone it seems to recognize that there's trade-offs, right? High internal validity typically means low external and vice versa. So the real answer, for the sake of time, the real answer is C. And let me explain why. So if we remember back to what I said about external and internal, so think about what descriptive studies are. We're just observing something as it occurs, and we're not really manipulating anything. We're not tightly controlling things. We just want to observe behaviors. Well, one of the ways that we just observe behaviors, we don't interfere. So that means that we don't have really any control over what's happening in this study, right? We're just observing things. So we have the least amount of internal validity because we're not controlling anything. Nothing is controlled. Anything can happen. We're just observing things. However, it's the most external validity because we're observing behaviors as they happen in real time in the real world. We'll learn about some different designs where maybe we control some things or we set up situations, but for the most part, descriptive studies are just trying to observe things as they naturally occur. So that means it would have the highest amount of external validity because we're just observing things that naturally happen. All right, for the people that answered B, I recognize that at least you recognize that if you have more of internal, you have less of external. But do people who answered B, do you see why it would be the least amount of internal validity and the most external? All right, I'm seeing seeing people say yes in the chat. All right, good. All right, so let's move on into different types of designs for descriptive studies. Excuse me, I lost the word. Descriptive studies. So cross-sectional design describes the sample at one point in time. So here's some examples. So at the end of the year, you're going to do a course evaluation where you rate my performance, or more importantly, you rate what you thought about the class, any changes that you would like to be made. So just at one time point, we are assessing your thoughts and feelings on that particular day about how you thought the classes went. For your lab projects, you're going to be rating performance of your group members. Just so at one point in time, we're just going to assess, hey, how do you feel about your group members and their contributions? A lot of psychology studies that you'll do through SONA. So if you have a chance to do research studies by students and faculty members, you go through SONA. A lot of them are cross-sectional designs where you just take one survey and it just asks about your thoughts and feelings. So this provides good information about opinions or behaviors at the time of the study, at that exact time of the study. So if you're investigating issues or concepts or whatever you're investigating, if you expect it to change over time, a cross-sectional design probably isn't best for you. If the construct or whatever you're studying is likely to change, the best or a better design would be to do a successive independent samples design. So this is kind of similar to a cross-sectional design, but you're going to do it repeatedly with a different sample from maybe year to year. So you can carry out the same study at several times with different samples. So here's an example. Let's say we want to survey drinking behavior in Psych 101 students. So we conduct a study, just as a basic survey, ask them about their drinking behaviors in the fall of 2017, and we find out that students on average drink 3 nights a week, or students average 3 nights a week of drinking 2+ drinks. Then we do that same exact study the next semester with Psych 101 students, and we find out that it actually increased to 4 nights a week drinking 2+ drinks. So an increase in 1 night. So the conclusion that we can come to is that among WVU students, drinking increased from fall 2017 to spring 2018. Okay, but this, once again, because we're doing a descriptive study, it doesn't get at why. We're just reporting drinking behaviors. But there could be a problem in the sample that we're collecting, right? So we can't say that, oh, between fall and spring, students increased in drinking. We can't truly say that, because what happens if, well, first off, we're not studying the same sample, right? It's 2 entirely different samples. Maybe, it's a result of just the students that we're getting, or maybe it's a result of, springtime. Maybe it's nicer to be outside. WVU, there's a lot where, I guess at any college, there's a lot of drinking that happens outside. People are more likely to drink because they're in social setting. So maybe that's the real reason why there's more drinking, or one of the explanations for why there's more drinking from fall to spring. Anyways, a successive independent sample is an easy way to assess changes over time, but these differences, if we find any differences, may reflect sampling error or biases. So any questions so far about cross-sectional design, asking a survey at one point in time about their current thoughts or feelings or behaviors or whatever you're studying, and a successive independent sample, which assesses that same survey at multiple times, whatever the time frame is, with different samples. Any questions so far about these 2 designs? All right. So let's say that we are curious about change, and we want to see how things change, but we want to look at it in the same sample because that's going to be a lot more stronger. So this is something called a longitudinal design. So you're going to follow the same sample of people and observe, survey, or measure them more than once. Here's a good example. It's called MIDAS, which is a national survey of midlife development in the US. This is a survey or a study that has gone on since the mid-1990s. And it asks a bunch of things about personality. So it asks a lot of things that you think when you think about psychology or what is a psychological concept. It asks a lot about that. what else want to say? Oh, okay. So basically with MIDAS or any longitudinal study is you get your initial sample. I think they had about like 7,000 something participants, and they follow them up every year or every 2 years or whatever their sampling rate is. Let's just say it's every year. And so they'll ask the same participants the same questions every year. And so now we can assess change. But there's some problems with this. Mainly these three: practice effects, attrition, and time. So let's go through a couple of these problems. Practice effects. So sometimes participants may change. If you're repeatedly, let me back up. Since we're repeatedly asking participants the same questions or having them do the same psychological tests, sometimes participants get better just as a result of doing it multiple times. So let's take the example of memory recall. Let's say we want to assess how does memory change across the lifespan. So using this MIDAS study, they do some memory recall task every year starting at the age of 20 up until they're 70 years old. And let's say for a while we noticed that, hey, participants get better every year, or on average, participants actually get better as time goes on. Well, that might not be a true developmental change, and it might just be as a result of, well, they're getting better because they're doing it multiple times, this psychological test multiple times. Practice makes perfect, right? Or you get better with practice. So people may be getting better or changing on their psychological studies, whatever we're measuring, just because they do it multiple times. So that's one limitation of a longitudinal design. The next one is something called attrition, or this is just simply participants dropping out. Doing a longitudinal study is very taxing, or can be very taxing on the participants. Think about the MIDAS study that I just talked about. It's, started in 1995, and they're following the same sample even till today. So, what is that? That's, 20, almost 25 years, I think. Yeah, like 26 years so far that the study's been going on. And let's just assume they ask them every year. That's a lot of potentially time for the participant. When you're 20 years old and you just first started out in a study, you have, a decent bit of free time. Fast forward 15, 20 years, and you're now 40 years old, still doing the same study, and now I should mention, it's not like they're doing something every day throughout the year. It's just one day that they have to do something. They have to take the survey. But let's say, you're 40 years old, you have a family now, a career, a life. It's time consuming. People drop out of studies. You'll see in your own data. I've actually started looking at some of the data from your own correlational studies, and we'll see even in here, it's not a longitudinal study, right? Your data participants, it should only take participants like a couple minutes to do your study, and you'll see participants like just stop halfway because they're like, I don't want to do this. Just imagine doing that something over 20 years, right? You're going to lose people, and that's another problem with longitudinal designs. And then finally, it's time consuming, both for the participant, but also for the researcher. So here's an example. I was on a grant my first 2 years at WVU, and it's just a 1-year longitudinal study. But what ends up happening is, so it takes you a while as a researcher to develop a study, right? It's just not something you do overnight. This could be a process that takes a year and a half. So you're already invested, let's just say, a year into developing this study. You haven't even collected any data yet. Now you got to find participants. And it's not like, depending on what type of methods you use to collect participants, you can't typically just get, okay, I need 300 participants, I can find it in a week. Doesn't happen. For us in our lab, it's actually taken us, I think it took us like about 2 years to just collect the first wave point for all of our participants. So right now we're already 3 years into our longitudinal study, and we only have just collected the first wave. Now we have an entire year after that. So we're looking at, just from the development of a study, like thinking about it and designing it, to getting all a 1 year of data from every participant, that may be a process that takes 4 or 5 years. And so this is very time consuming, and that doesn't even include data analyzing, writing up papers, which could be another couple years. So longitudinal designs, it takes a lot of time for the participant, and it's a lot of time for the researcher. But bottom line, it provides outstanding data for assessing changes over time, but there are a lot of challenges that go along with longitudinal designs. So let's go into another way of, or another design of descriptive studies, and that is observational research. And we're going to stick with this idea of observational research for the remainder of the lecture. So what is observational research? Well, it's just observation of behavior, either as it occurs naturally or in some controlled situation. So why should we conduct observational research? Hopefully it's become evident as we've been talking about descriptive research, which observational research is a big part of that, but it can be used for exploratory studies to help better understand a situation, and it allows for theories to be induced. So just with the show of thumbs up, or physically showing your hand up, who has heard of Jean Piaget? Cool, I see a couple fingers going up. Yeah, maybe you've heard about him in Intro to Psych, or maybe child development or some type of developmental class. But so he did a lot of work with, and a very pivotal, his research is very pivotal in cognitive development in children. And I'm not going to get into what he did, but a lot of his theories came as a result of him just observing his children. So he originally just started off noticing how his children developed, and he started doing experiments then on his children based off of those observations, and then he implemented it with other children. So his big theory, this theory of cognitive development from Piaget, which which is still taught, we still know it to be, or it's still a good theory, right? A lot of research supports it. You can never say a theory is true, but a lot of research supports it, really stems from his observations of his own children. So an observational research can be the groundwork for major theories, like the theory of cognitive development by Piaget. And it can also be used to verify work from laboratory experiments. So let's say that you did an experiment in a lab, you can then go see if it actually happens in the real world to maximize that external validity idea. All right, so that's the nutshell of observational research. Let's go into some different types of observational research. First off, let's start off with naturalistic observation. And this is what it sounds like. It's just observing behavior as it occurs in its natural setting, whatever that natural setting may be. So the observer does not interact with participants or interfere with their behavior. They are just trying to be a fly on the wall observing behavior. The goal is to make unobtrusive observations. We want to maximize that external validity, and we don't want to influence our participants in any way. We just want to see what naturally happens. So let's go over to, I want to have two examples of this. So first one is Jane Goodall. So this is her observing chimps and wherever she was observing, and I think she did it in a couple places. But there's a story that she reports that she was, sitting there observing this one particular chimp, or maybe it was a couple of chimps, doesn't matter. But she noticed that it was staring at a termite hill. And so she's just observing this chimp staring at a termite hill, and it looked like the chimp was thinking. And then the chimp eventually gets a stick, sticks the stick in the termite hill and pulls it out, and now has like a termites on sticks and starts eating it. So this is a really important finding, I guess, coming from this naturalistic observation, is the idea that chimps are intelligent. Using tools is one of the things that we consider like a requirement for a species to be considered intelligent, right? Or to have whatever above average species intelligent. Anyways, if a species is intelligent, they can use tools. Some birds use that. I think like crows are also really can do that. And we consider them to be intelligent. Anyways, so she developed this idea that, hey, chimps aren't as dumb as we thought, and they actually are really intelligent beings based off of naturalistic observations. And now then she went in and other people did experiments to confirm that. But let's say that, we had all these chimps in non-natural settings, and she was observing them. Would we have necessarily seen chimps using tools if we feed them every day? If they lived a cozy life where they didn't have to scrounge for food, we just gave them food, would we have seen them exhibit this type of behavior? Possibly not. So this naturalistic observation was crucial to coming up with ideas and eventually us confirming, hey, chimps are actually really intelligent. Here's another one involving people, and I think it's really funny. So this study essentially looks at how long it takes someone to back out of a parking spot after you get in your car. So just imagine you walk out of Kroger, you get in your car, you put your groceries away, you get in your car, and they start measuring as soon as you step into your car until how long it takes for you to back out and leave that space. And what they found was that if if there was someone waiting to get in that space, people actually took longer to back out when someone was waiting compared to when no one was waiting. And they called this idea of like feeling territorial over your parking space. Even though you no longer need it, people still waited longer to back out when someone else wanted that spot. Would this have happened? Would this type of behavior happen in a study if we had participants come into a lab, or our lab maybe outside, whatever. If participants come in to do a study and we tell them, hey, we want you to do this, where you get in your car and we're gonna have you back out, and this is what we're doing. Would participants be likely to? Would we have found this idea that, or this finding that people are territorial over parking spaces? Probably not, right? We probably would have, because for multiple reasons, which we'll get into, but one of the big ones, people change their behavior when they know they're being watched. So we wouldn't have had this real finding in a controlled experiment in a laboratory or in a laboratory setting. So so hopefully these two things highlight the importance of descriptive studies, or excuse me, of naturalistic observation. All right, so what are some advantages? Ethics. It allows us to study the phenomena of of things that maybe wouldn't be ethical in a controlled experiment. An example of this would be, let's say we wanted to look at aggressive behavior on the playground in children. And my research question, what I'm particularly interested in is, well, how do certain kids react when they're getting bullied? Or, if things aren't going their way? Well, I can do that by going to a playground, right, and sitting there and observing what happens, because we know it happens all the time that kids, and it might not be the most extreme bullying, but maybe something doesn't go their way and things get physical in the playground. Whether it's pushing, shoving, actual fist fights, whatever. This wouldn't be that ethical if I wanted to do this in a controlled setting, where I had a kid come to our laboratory, and I had another kid start provoking that participant, making fun of him, bullying him, and I wanted to see, okay, how does the kid react to being bullied, in terms of physical aggression? Definitely not ethical and would not be allowed in most institutions, or maybe any institution. So it allows us to study some things that may be considered unethical to set up in a study. It allows us to do it in the real world where it actually is occurring, like aggressive behavior on the playground. Another advantage is it maximizes this idea of external validity. And I'm going to keep, and hopefully you've noticed, I keep on repeating internal and external validity. I understand it is a difficult concept, but hopefully with these examples, you can see why certain studies have high external and low internal and what that means. But naturalistic observation allows us to maximize this external validity, because we're observing behaviors that occurs naturally by definition. It's the highest level of external validity that you can get. But the disadvantage, because we have high external validity, lack of control limits conclusions, right? This is idea of low internal validity. We're not 100% sure whatever our findings are really due to what we're looking at, because we haven't controlled it. So that is a disadvantage of naturalistic observation. Any questions so far about naturalistic observation? I think it's pretty basic idea so far. All right, if not, we have a major decision to make. So we can do a couple different types of naturalistic observations. We could do a disguised or an undisguised. So disguised observation is where the subjects are unaware they're being observed. So they don't know that they're being observed. This results in the most natural behavior, maximizing that external validity. But there could be some possible ethical concerns and may not be possible in all situations. First off, like we talked about, I believe last class or maybe the class before, if we're just observing people in a public space where they have no expectation of privacy, then there's no ethical concerns. But some other things, that might not be possible in all scenarios. So there always are some maybe possible ethical concerns when participants aren't aware that they actually are being studied. So that's disguised observation. Undisguised observation is people know they're being observed. However, this may trigger reactivity, or people behave different in the presence of an observer, right? We all act different if we know people are watching. If you didn't have your camera on, would you be sitting here watching, watching this lecture? Maybe, maybe not. So this is something called the Hawthorne effect, or the idea that people act differently in the presence of an observer. And this actually came about in, I think, a relatively interesting way. They did a study, like a business did a study where they wanted to maximize productivity. Let's just say it was a factory. I don't remember the exact specifics. But so they brought in people and they realized, hey, productivity increased when we made the lights brighter. But then they also noticed productivity also increased when they made the lights dimmer. Productivity increased when they turned the heat up by a few degrees, but productivity also increased when they turned the heat down and they made it a little bit cooler. And what they eventually realized is that people work better when they know they're being watched, or people are more productive when they know they are being watched. So this is the idea of the Hawthorne effect, right? People change their behaviors. So they can change their behaviors in a couple different ways. So first off, this idea of participant expectancy, or where the participant guesses what the researcher is trying to do or what the researcher is hypothesizing, and they try to do that, right? They try to go along and do what the researcher is hypothesizing. On the flip side of that, participants' reluctance is where they guess, or they try to guess what the research study is about, and they try to go against it. And it might not be because they're not trying to be mean, but let's say they could just have the mentality of, oh, this researcher is trying to stump me or trick me, and they want me to do this, so I'm just actually going to do the opposite, right? They may try to guess what the researcher is trying to do and go against it, but not being mean. So let me give you an example. I participated in a study once where they were trying to see if we would cheat on a video game. And if I would have guessed, I'd have been like, oh, okay, they're trying to get me to cheat. One of the, if I'm remembering correctly, like a list of cheat commands or like up, down, left, right was like left on the computer screen. And then the researcher was like, oh, that wasn't supposed to be here when they came in. Anyways, they were trying to get me to cheat. Now, if I would have known what they were doing, and I could have guessed it as the study was going along, I'd be like, well, I'm not going to cheat because I see they're trying to get me to cheat. And I'm not going to do that. Anyways, that's an example of participant reluctance. There could be something called evaluation apprehension. I've never heard it called that, but this is essentially where participants try to conceal private info. It happens a lot. If I asked this class to report on, I wanted to get a descriptive report on any illicit or illegal drugs, even though I would not care or would report you, I bet a lot of people would be hesitant on a psychological study to admit to using illegal drugs or to drinking under the age of 21. Even though I, as a researcher, would never tell anyone or report you, people are still reluctant to give out that information. So if people know they're being watched or being observed, they may act differently. And here's a couple different ways how they can act differently. Any questions about the differences or need any more examples of these three variations? Okay. All right, so to minimize this reactivity, right, because we know that participants may act differently, to minimize reactivity, we can do a couple things. So we could do partial concealment, or this is where participants do not know what is being observed. So they know that they're in a study, but maybe we have them do several different things, some of which we don't really care about, but it's kind of just to throw them off the scent of what we're actually studying. So that could reduce people trying to guess what we're doing and trying to act differently, either going with it or going against our hypothesis, because they don't know exactly what's happening. We could also use a little bit of deception as well, bringing up some terms from last week. We could also wait it out. So behavior tends to normalize after participants get used to an observer. So one example that we could, that from my own experience is we wanted to look at parent-child interactions on an Etch-a-Sketch task. So we had them use an Etch-a-Sketch together. Like each controlled one dial, and we wanted to see like who took control, just interactions between the two. We actually it got to the point where we one dyad, parent child, it was an adolescent, but like the mom actually like hit the kid because the kid was like not listening and like going a different way. It was like a playful hit, but it was still a hit. Anyways, so one of the things that we actually kind of did both of these, is the participants really didn't know what was happening. We had them do a bunch of different things, but we only cared about that particular task. But we also recorded these participants. So we brought out a camcorder and we had it sitting there and we let them know, hey, we're recording you. But one of the things we could have done, or we did, is I had it sitting out for a while. And I started, before we got to the task that I really cared about, I was like, hey, is it okay that we record these sessions? The camcorder's going, everyone said yes, or mostly everyone said yes. So throughout the course of the study, while I had the camcorder sitting there, it actually wasn't recording anything until we got to the point where, okay, I actually care about this part. And so they've gotten used to this camcorder being on, or so they thought it was on. So that way they act the most natural and they aren't acting any different because the camcorder is new to them. Right, or I just introduced it, so they may act different that way. So I concealed what we were doing, and I also waited out that behavior, or I waited it out in the sense that I normalized them to the idea of the camcorder being there. We could also do something, we could also use knowledgeable informants. So this is where you use a friend, family member, or coworker to report on the participants, as natural behavior is more likely around your family, friends, coworkers, right? Rather than if an observer was sitting there. So an example of this could be, let's say that I'm a behavioral therapist and I'm working with children or working with a particular child who acts up at home. So I, as the behavioral therapist, maybe has the kid come into the laboratory, they don't act up. I maybe go to the house itself and try to observe, I do all these observations, and the kid still doesn't act up, even though I go through trying to, be not interfering, just trying to be a fly on the wall. Well, one of the things I could do is like, hey, mom, let me train you very briefly. Here's a checklist of all the behaviors. What I want you to do is every time the kid does something, like put a check mark down. And so we can tally up behaviors and see exactly what's going on. So we're using a knowledgeable informant, right? A family member to do the role of the observer. And that comes with its own challenges of people are biased if they're observing their family and friends, but that is one way that we can minimize reactivity. So there's another way of observation, and it's this idea of participant observation, or the observer joins the group, whatever group you're studying, and becomes a part of the group's interactions. So this observer's presence may be disguised or undisguised. And so here are some examples. This first one is actually really interesting and may have come up in your intro to psych, maybe not. And if you're interested, I highly suggest that you go and seek out this research or stuff on this research, because it's really interesting. This idea, it's called On Being Sane in Insane Places. And essentially, long story short, what they did is they had grad students go into an insane asylum and pretend to be insane. Maybe it wasn't an insane asylum, but like a mental health, it basically wasn't an asylum. And they had these grad students pretend to be insane because they wanted to see what the treatment was like, what was going on in this asylum. So these observers actually became, they dived deep into this facility and became pretend insane people, for the lack of better words, and to try to observe what was going on, right? And it's just rather interesting because, like, near the end of the study, the grad students were like, oh, no, I'm part of the study. I don't actually belong here. But the people at the facility were like, yeah, sure, this is an insane asylum. Sure, you're definitely not supposed to be here. You are part of a study. So then it just becomes really funny, and the lead researcher had to come in and like clear things up. Anyways, it's a really interesting topic and idea and study. I suggest if you're interested, go check it out. But some other examples could be, maybe you want to study a group or some culture from the point of view of its members. So let's say the Amish community, right? The Amish community is pretty reserved. This study would probably never happen because the Amish community is very, very reserved. But let's say they would allow you in, and you lived with the Amish, and you just, you wanted to observe their everyday life, and maybe you care about specific behaviors, maybe parent-child interactions in the Amish community, but you live there and you just observe what is going on. So this is the idea of participant observation. You as the researcher actually living with, around whatever you're trying to observe. So there's some advantages to this type of research. You as a researcher or observer can study situations that would otherwise be closed, like religious rituals, let's say, or like Amish communities, or communities or groups that are a little bit closed off or reserved. It also allows introspection, or you to figure out regarding subjective experiences of its group members, because you really get to learn about what people are thinking and feeling and how they're reacting to what's going on in their everyday life. So this is the advantage of this idea of participant observation. But there is some disadvantages. The observer presence may alter the group's behavior. Once again, that goes back to the Hawthorne effect. We talked about this. Know you're being observed, you're going to change your behavior. It also may be difficult to avoid observer bias. So if you're actually living amongst people, you may be biased because you're living with them. And there's maybe some ethical problems with this, that behaviors are not public is a violation of privacy. So if people don't know that you're observing them and you're being invited into these private situations, problem with ethics, because they're not told they're being studied, there's ethical considerations to keep in mind when you're doing participant observation. All right, any questions about this idea of participant observation? You as the researcher actually getting involved and maybe living or being around whatever you're studying. Another good example of this is, let's say you are a family therapist, right? This may be an extreme case, but I'm sure it does happen in some places, where the family therapist may actually come live with you for a night or two. I know one of my professors in my undergrad and master's was a behavioral child therapist and actually sat with a problem child for like all night. Like the kid kept on getting out of bed and wanted to sleep with the parents. So, and the parents were having trouble keeping the kid in bed. Anyway, she sat with that kid all night, dealing with that kid getting up, crying. That's pretty intense, right? But she was observing their behaviors, what was going on. Anyways, bottom line, so let's sum up these descriptive studies to end this class. Descriptive studies allow us to understand characteristics, behaviors, and or experiences of a population. There's multiple ways to go about doing that, some of which we touched on, some of which you will learn about in the pre-recorded lectures. There's actually 3 of them this time. They're all still relatively short. They're all a couple minutes long, but make sure you check that out. There are 3 recorded mini lectures, so go ahead and check that out after class or at your earliest convenience before the next quiz and exam. All right, that's the end of the lecture today. I'm available. I will stay on forever as long as someone else is on asking questions. If you have any questions about assignment number 3 or assignment number 4 or any of the material today, please feel free to stay on. If not, I will see you this Friday. All right, have a great day.
Thank you.
Hi, I actually have a question real quick. It was just about our assignments. You said that we could get your feedback on them. Whenever I go on there and go to the grade, it doesn't, it shows the link for the assignment and what you sent us back, but there's no comments or anything, so I didn't know if there was something else you were referring to.
Let me check. So you saw the so there was feedback left, there was a document left.
There's a document there and it says my name and assignment, and then it says JH edits, but there's no edits on it or any comments or anything.
Did you download it and open it?
Yeah.
Okay, let me just double check, because you might not have had any.
Okay.
Dropbox. All right, let me see. Yeah, okay, so I can email it to you, but are you sure you downloaded it and
Yeah, I can share my screen if you want.
Actually, go ahead and
to show you. Okay, here.